Here we are again for another week of Coffee Talk Tuesday, and welcome everybody. We've got a pretty large group this morning, so I'm excited to get started. Last week we had a great conversation, and it was the first of a series that we're doing on creating and providing opportunities for social interactions for kids during this time. And last week we talked about elementary age kids, and this week we're going to talk about middle and high school kids and how we can help with promoting and increasing meaningful interactions, social interactions through virtual platforms and actually in person as well. So I don't want to waste any more time. I'd like to introduce our special guest. I want to welcome back Christina Fricano, who was here with us last week. She is our speech and language pathologist at the Learning Academy. And I would also like to introduce Carissa Carey, who's a special education teacher at our Learning Academy Naugatuck site, and Tranquillo, who is a behavior analyst and clinical supervisor at the Learning Academy in Stratford. And they're all here today, very excited to talk to us all about getting those social interactions going. So Lisa, can you get us started with some questions and some thoughts you had for, who are you interviewing? For Kat.
Yeah, so one of the questions, or one of the things that we talked a little bit about last week was expectation setting, and how can you set expectations for kids on a virtual platform. So I guess my question for you is what might that look like for older kids, for middle school and high school students? How do you tackle expectations?
Yeah, and I think what's really important to kind of talk about before I get into how we set up the expectations is that while we're looking to increase these opportunities for social engagement with our students, we want to remember that it's going to look different for our population, right? And it's going to look different within our population. So that's going to kind of drive our expectations, so to speak. For a lot of our students, social interactions are challenging, right? So they're not going to be motivating, they're not going to be rewarding in themselves. So we want to make sure that we're kind of catering expectations to our students and what's appropriate for them. So for example, I have a middle school classroom that I'm thinking of where all of the students in this classroom are very motivated to join, right? They want to be in this every single day. So this teacher has stricter expectations. She has higher expectations for them. You know, she tells them when they have to log in, their camera has to be on, they have to share 2 topics, they have to comment, they have to ask questions. There's lots of expectations, right? These kids can handle it, and they can do it because they want to. They're very motivated to do it. We have to remember that that's not the case for all of our kids. Of some high school classrooms where being engaged in that sort of conversation isn't motivating for these students. So not only do we need to look at outside reinforcement other than just the social interactions themselves, we need to lower our expectations for those guys, right? If we tell these guys to come in with their cameras on, ready to share 2 things, ready to comment and ask questions, they may not choose to join at all because it's not motivating, and it might be easier and more rewarding to just stay off the Google Meet altogether and maybe play video games by themselves. We don't want. And so to avoid that, set low expectations. Maybe the only expectation is to log in at a certain time. It's okay if your camera's off. It's okay if you don't say anything. It's okay if you're just listening. You can still earn that outside reinforcement, whether it's Ames or whatever it is, just for following that simple expectation. And then as we think it's appropriate, we can increase those expectations.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you mentioned reinforcement a couple of times and Ames. So are there, do you have thoughts about reinforcement or things that maybe parents could be trying?
We offer Ames to parents, and I know that it's something it's a form of reinforcement that was working in the school building, so it may not carry over to the home setting. So we have found students that are using Ames and some that aren't. So like I said, the students that are just motivated for being in the Google Meets, maybe we'll add additional Google Meet opportunities for them to join, or they get increased time to talk Google Meet. And then for the other students, we'll maybe use Ames, which they can cash in for gift cards. We kind of just find what works for them.
And sorry, I was just going to say, can you just quickly, because there's going to be people out here who are listening who have no idea what you're talking about. What are these Ames going on? So if you could just give it just a quick overview, not in detail, just what kind of, just the idea of a token economy and what that kind of means.
Right. So the aims we use is kind of like a point system, like a token economy, like you said. So they can earn these aims, these tokens for specific behaviors. So in the case that I was just mentioning, if it's just all you have to do is log in at a certain time, they can earn that aim, that token, and then they can cash those in later on for things from our school store, which is now virtual. And the amount of tokens, the amount of aims they need to purchase things changes based on the value of the items.
And then just to chime in for parents at home even, Lisa, I know I have two daughters, one who independently and eagerly logs into her classroom meets every day, and she's happy to do it. And I have another daughter where it's like pulling teeth. So for her, I always just make sure that I have something really fun for her to do afterwards. So if she had been, you know, she likes her iPad time where she's allowed to play a specific game, she's allowed to do that after the Google. So that's just one easy way is follow, you know, pair it with something that's really fun and exciting. It's going to follow it almost immediately.
Remat principle.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess the question, Kat, you had mentioned a little bit like for kids who don't really like signing on, this is harder for, lowering your expectations. So what does that mean in terms of like the time that they might be expected to spend engaged on this virtual platform? Like, should we be focused more on quality over quantity? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
As we are right now, I really want to focus on quality over quantity. I mean, we don't want to be looking at so much of how much are they saying, how long are they on, like you were saying, or how many words are they saying. We really want to be focusing, I think, on the quality of these interactions and setting those expectations low for the quantity of it, and really just looking at, are these interactions meaningful for the students? One example I'm thinking of is we have a student who he would log in to these Google sessions with the class, but he wasn't saying anything at first. And he recently moved, and at that next session, all of a sudden we're going on a tour of his house, and he's bringing his computer around and showing us what his new house is like. And in that sense, the teacher let it go because the quality of that was so meaningful, because he wasn't sharing before, and now he found something to share, and his peers asking him questions and commenting, and you're seeing that back and forth. And we weren't focused so much on how much is he meeting the expectations or how much is he doing, but the quality of it was important.
Kat, can I pop in, Kat, if you don't mind, and ask you a quick question that I was just thinking as you were talking about people. Not all of the students out there and the parents who are listening might have this great team, you know, like you guys from the Academy who are supporting their students through these social interactions. So if I were a parent who might not have that support, what would I look for to know whether it's meaningful or not? What does meaningful mean?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I mean, it depends on the student, right? And if in my case, in that student, that example that I'm thinking of, just seeing him smile and each room he went into, I could just tell, you know, that it was meaningful to him because he kept going. You know, he went next room, kept answering the questions, and then the other students kept asking questions and commenting, and it was kind of fueling him in a sense that the more he asked, the further he went. So it seemed meaningful to him because he kept going.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the idea of engagement too, right? If as they're engaged in what they're doing, then that and and so I know. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that just really provides this great opportunity for shaping, right? You know, we talk about how we have to start somewhere. And if we start where they are, then it gives us an opportunity to kind of move in a direction that we want them to go.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Or where they want to go, where they're where at the bottom line, where they're
significant for them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it also sounds like in terms of engagement and meaningful interactions, we want to be finding things that are fun for kids, that they really enjoy doing. And so I know that, you know, at the Learning Academy, we've got a couple of different groups going, and it sounds like right now I'm about like a Dungeons and Dragons group happening at the Academy. Like what's
been waiting for this to come up.
Tell me about this.
Yes, we do. So before remote learning started, we have these two staff who were very enthusiastic about this game that I don't know much about, but they took the initiative to put together this group to play Dungeons and Dragons on a weekly basis during lunch. I don't know much about this game, but I know it's a card game, there's turn taking, there's sportsmanship, there's a lot of great social opportunities in this game, right? and watching them when we were in the building play together, it was really nice to see. I mean, it was this group of students who on a day-to-day basis normally wouldn't be meeting up and talking to each other. I mean, it was a group of, it was 7th to 12th grade. And these boys would just sit around eating their lunch, laughing together, playing the game, commenting, you know, congratulating each other. They were learning from each other. And when remote learning started and this kind of stopped, I was a little upset. So I reached out to the 2 staff and they were equally as overjoyed to get this started. So they did a great job. They found a website where you can play this game online, and then they set up a Google Meet. And so the boys all still get together and play the game online and have all of this interaction. And it's a group of kids who are typically not joining in their classroom social interactions too. So to get them involved again in something that they're interested in.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I think that speaks right to that like engagement and meeting piece, right? It's something that they're finding is fun and that they're excited to be doing and they're really engaged in. So for, if parents, I mean, I guess if parents have ideas for social things like that, that their kids might be interested in, is that something that you would recommend them kind of trying out or seeing, like exploring interests that might be already existing?
Yes, I mean, that's a great way to get buy-in, as we say, like to get them to want to engage with their peers and have a social interaction. Yeah, if it's something that they're interested in, they're definitely more likely to initiate that and continue it.
Yeah, and we've been looking into developing some of these ourselves, some other social groups. So we're definitely, not just for Learning Academy kids, but for the community. So we're looking for ideas as far as what kinds of activities or social things that kids would be at all ages would be interested in, because we're trying to put some of those together. So please let us know out there if you think that there's something that we can help support. But I want to talk to Carissa for a little bit. Michelle, I know you have a couple of questions. Carissa works with a little bit of a different population of students. So Michelle, you had some questions you wanted to ask Carissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, Carissa, you work with students who have some significant challenges with communication skills. So could you just tell us a little bit about what you've done to engage those students virtually?
Yeah, so I do work with students who definitely have some more social and communication deficits. And so kind of the key to engaging those students, especially in virtual learning, is just making an initial connection with them and kind of getting our foot in the door. And we do this by something Kat talked about, pairing those social interactions with positive outcomes. So this means, being aware of who and what is reinforcing for that student. So do they prefer to socially engage with people at school, their peers or their teachers, or people within their home, maybe their siblings or their parents? And then is the social interaction in and of itself reinforcing? Do they enjoy that social interaction or do they not? If it's the case that they don't, then we would want to make sure that we're aware of other items and activities that are of interest to that student and positively associated for that student that we can pair with those social interactions, and we can associate them either within or contingent on interacting with other people and engaging with them. So this could include, playing with an iPad after a social interaction, if that's something the student prefers, taking a break from, all social interaction for a period of time after engaging, whatever is really reinforcing for that student, and using that to our advantage. And then the second thing would be to get those interactions going. They might need some help. So they might not have the skills to initiate a social interaction on their own, and they may not understand the appropriate responses. So to do this virtually, we use 2 different kind of models. So one would be modeling social interactions. So the other adults within the social interaction might model appropriate responses, greetings, and it might look in the beginning where the student just observes. And then over time, we start encouraging them to participate as well and directly reinforcing any kind of participation with those positive outcomes. Another option we have is if the student can read, we've been using scripts. So if a student can't generate ideas for social engagement on their own, we can provide them concrete examples within a script where they can look at it, they can read it, and then we directly reinforce that engagement, and it increases the likelihood that they'll participate in that engagement again in the future. Once they become more independent, we can start fading those supports out, but it really gets our foot in the door and starts initial interactions. We have to just remember that for those students who struggle with communication and socialization, you know, socialization as a concept is pretty abstract. And so providing them really concrete examples in the beginning and then allowing them to generalize after sometimes is a really good place to start.
And it sounds like there's such a variety of opportunities and things that we can do for this specific population. But I heard you use a phrase early on that said, you want to make an initial connection with those students. So could you just expand on that, and what are some ideas for parents on how to make that initial connection and what that looks like?
Yeah, so it's important to kind of like Kat was talking about, meet the student where they're currently at to set them up for success. So if we set our expectations too high initially, it can lead to some failed attempts at engaging with others socially, and it makes the student less likely to participate in the future. And so if we meet the student where they are and then successfully pair those socializations with positive outcomes, we can increase the chances of it happening in the future. So we have to be mindful and open-minded about what social interactions look like. So for parents, I would recommend observing their student and seeing, you know, what is really of interest for them. If the student, for example, prefers to play alone, we could start with something like parallel play. Maybe they really enjoy playing video games. We could sit next to them and play a video game with them. And it doesn't require as much direct social interaction, but we're still completing an activity together. I think we have these ideas about what socialization means. We might just have to modify those ideas to meet our students where they are, and then build up on that. And we found that remotely there's ways to do this too. So we could start this in home with the parents, and then we can do some of these things remotely, including playing video games. We've done coloring, you know, a lot of different activities that can be done parallel and don't necessarily require that immediate, you know, face-to-face interaction, which may be our end goal. But it's a really good place to start where the student's comfortable.
That's great. And it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility there too, which is awesome. And I know that you work with students that are a little bit older. So it's in this time, it's a little bit hard to kind of engage some of these students sometimes. And I know we've had a lot of parents kind of asking us how to engage kids in the best way. So could you just talk a little bit about what you've done or some strategies for that?
I think the most important thing to remember is that it's kind of a difficult time for everybody, and that we're all really just doing our best. And it's not atypical for, most teenagers to isolate or withdraw a little bit, in a normal situation, never mind when they do have a lot of changes to their routines, to their schedules, and really what their day-to-day life looks like. So I think, just being mindful that this isn't an atypical reaction, and we need to kind of modify our behavior to help the student kind of come back to a sense of normalcy. So I suggest, especially for my families who are having trouble with engagement at home, that we start there before we really push in with, academics and school and socialization at home. Getting the student to re-engage at home is really helpful. And so what I found most effective with parents is kind of coaching them through how to make those positive associations, how to conduct observations where they can, pick out what's really important to the student, identify those things, and then, use those as an in for their student. It might just be some kids just really prefer to be alone, especially teenagers. It's not uncommon. So giving them that time, and then maybe you introduce yourself where you're not introducing a conversation or a topic. Maybe you're just sitting with them, and maybe you're silent, but that's a really good way to start, where I'm not here to interrupt your piece. I'm just kind of here to introduce myself as someone who's available to you, and really coaching them through building that up, finding little ins, whether it be, instead of focusing on schoolwork today, we're going to complete a recipe together. And we're still hitting those, really functional skills that they're going to be using in the future, but in a way that makes sense for the student.
And I think it's important, Chrissy, you have a teenager. You're the only one on this panel with a teenager.
I have two. Aren't I lucky?
I think it's important to point out that if they don't want to engage with you, it's not a reflection of you as a parent.
Absolutely.
Right? How many interactions do you get out of your teenagers in a given day?
Not many. And I also think, they all have different personalities. So I have a boy and a girl. I get a little bit more from my daughter than I get very little from my son. But on a good day, I get very little from him. That's part of his personality and his age. And but going back to the expectations piece, you take what you can get.
Mm-hmm. And I think meeting them where is comfortable for them. So make these interactions really uncomfortable for them and set those expectations too high, they're much more likely to continue to withdraw, maybe even more than before. But if we just make ourselves available and associate interacting with us with positive things, it really just increases the likelihood they're going to start independently kind of coming to us and initiating interactions.
And I make the fatal mistake all the time of asking a million questions to drag out that interaction. And I'm reminded by my 17-year-old that that's annoying. But yet I continue to do it.
Christina, we want to hear from you. You were here last week with us talking about younger kids. What would you say about this age group and this population that we're talking about?
I think, well, the age group is just so, especially once you get into the middle high school age, we're just looking at so many different maturity and personality changes and different expectations from their peers in terms of communication. So, when we think about a group of our students all interacting with each other, we're going to set different expectations than if, say, like your child is on a Zoom call with his cousins, because that interaction is going to look a little bit different, just by the nature of, kind of the family expectations and the family dynamic versus like the classroom dynamic and the more structured setting of being with your, school peers. And then also, when you think about like what Chrissy was saying about how we're considered kind of annoying if you ask too many questions and you're kind of trying to drag out the conversation. The same kind of goes like if your middle or high schooler is on Zoom or another platform with their peers or friends, and you're trying to kind of help them, I would try to do all of that off screen and not kind of get in the background here. Because they are a little bit more sensitive when you get into those teenage years. They get a lot more sensitive in terms of like being embarrassed. And even the kids that you wouldn't think would be embarrassed about it really don't like to be called out in front of their peers. And one tip I'd have for parents too is kind of like use that mute button to your advantage, like hide off screen, move that mouse and mute it if you're going to tell your student like, hey, you're doing too much talking, or like, I noticed that you're sitting here. If you want to say something like, here's how here's some strategies you can use or something I can help you with. Just so kind of you're not calling them out in front of their friends.
That is such a great point, Christina.
They're, middle and high school, you get all into a different beast once you add those hormones in.
Developmentally, it makes a lot of sense, right? So as when kids are younger, their parents are really important and they're very influenced by parents and, the family dynamic. And then as kids get older, peers become that much more important. So I think right, it's this tricky time, right, where we want to encourage, especially for our kids who a lot of them have difficulty with that communication and that social piece. They really want to interact and they value what their peers think, but they do need that assistance with it sometimes, at least for some of the kids that we work with. So it can get a little tricky.
Yeah, and we talked last week kind of about those 3 groups of kids that will have kind of the most difficulty interacting, especially over a video platform. And those are, the kids with the receptive and expressive difficulties. So they kind of have difficulty understanding and then being able to kind of express themselves through language. And then we have those kids who, you know, have some pragmatic deficits in that they don't know how to enter the conversation or how to interject themselves. And then you have those kids kind of on the other end who are gonna be the ones that want to dominate the conversation, who are like very, very motivated to be interacting with their peers. And so they have 475 things to tell them. And so you kind of want, you know, your students best, and the parents know their children best. So just kind of gauging kind of where your child falls and being able to meet them where they are. And we created some visuals to kind of help with some of this too. So we have an updated kind of computer expectations visual that can be posted above the computer that goes over stuff like, you know, face the screen and make sure that, you know, if I'm not talking that I mute myself and things like that. Something that's a little sleeker for our older guys.
A little cooler.
Yeah, so that they don't feel, I've had a couple students tell me, they're like, no, these pictures are babyish. So we made sure that.
And we will post all resources on our website. So you'll make sure that you'll have access to those.
Right, so they'll all be downloadable. And then we have a visual that kind of goes over expectations for kind of how to stay on topic and adding to the conversation. And then one for those kids that kind of need some help with the receptive expressive piece. So looking at understanding and being able to add to the conversation, looking at like WH question starters and comment starters. And again, you know, like Kat and Carissa mentioned, we want to make sure that these interactions are really fun for our students. And, you know, parents at home, like if you notice that your student's really not enjoying being on Zoom at all or being on a video call, it's okay to call it quits. We don't have to set that expectation, like Kat and Carissa said, to stay there for a long period of time. We want to make sure that this is something positive for them so that they want to keep doing it again in the future.
And that's not an easy thing for a parent, I'll say, because I know for me, if, you know, I know that my kids, I have two little ones, and they're going on interacting with their classmates and their teachers a couple of times a day. If they miss any of that, I get this feeling of that's a missed opportunity. I've had to really, you know, kind of move away from that, particularly with my younger one, who really, we were doing, you know, different things during the week, different offerings that are awesome for some kids, but for mine, she just wasn't enjoying it. And so I had to take a step back, you know, and think about what my expectations were for her and lighten those up, because I think sometimes we're hard on ourselves as parents, and we want to provide every opportunity we can for the kids, but we really need to think about, are they even going to get anything out of it, or are we doing it for us? I think that's a big piece that as a parent, that's not easy for me ever, but is always something that I'm going to be continuously working on. I tell you, I think we could have this conversation for hours. Unfortunately, we only have this small amount of time with you talking about this, but this is why we're doing this 3-part series talking about different age groups so that we can really hone in on some of those specifics with each age group. But we are out of time. And so I want to thank you guys for being here. Kat, Carissa, and Christina, you are all the C's. And your expertise is so appreciated. And I feel like I could talk to you guys, you know, for myself, for my own kids. And it's so great to hear all the things that you're doing with the students that you work with. So thank you so much. Remember, if you're listening, if you have any questions for us, either about past sessions or about future ones, next week we're going to be talking about, we're going to continue with the social opportunities discussion, but we're going to be talking about the 18 and older folks. So send us questions. You can send questions to info@ippi.org, or you can put them in the comment section below here. And we look forward to talking more about that next week. We'll have some new guest experts coming on board to talk to you about social interactions for that age group. So if there's nothing else from the crowd, I want to thank everyone again for joining our coffee talk. And until next week, we'll see you then.